Hi everyone, I'm Michael from Messenger Bag Media, and today we're going to be looking back at some of our most helpful Adobe tips and lessons that we covered in 2024. There are plenty of useful tips, tricks, and shortcuts here, so be sure to stick around until the end where we'll also provide a bonus mention. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, as we've got plenty of great content releasing in the coming weeks. To kick things off, we're showing you how to perfectly remove any subject from a background in a photo. If you've tried this in the past, it's easier and better than ever before in the latest version of Photoshop. First of all, what is Select and Mask? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Select and Mask opens a separate workspace within Adobe Photoshop that allows you to refine and save a detailed selection as a new mask layer. You may be familiar with the standard lasso tool and quick selection tools, which can do a pretty great job of creating a detailed selection automatically. Photoshop also has a built-in Select Subject tool that is awesome for grabbing a relatively accurate selection of the image's subject. So when should you use the Select and Mask function? This function is helpful for previewing your selection before you mask it, and is especially useful when masking a subject with a lot of fine details. In this instance, a woman with rather curly, frizzy hair. For this demonstration, our goal is to remove this woman from her original background and place her in this room. If I just simply select the subject and remove the background, the result is pretty good, but not perfect. This is where Select and Mask comes in handy. To access the Select and Mask workspace, make sure you have a selection tool active. Anyone will work, and you should see the Select and Mask button in the top menu bar. Now you have two options. You can either select your subject using one of the selection tools and then enter the Select and Mask workspace to refine your selection, or you can create your selection with the Select and Mask workspace itself. For this tutorial, we will be working entirely within the Select and Mask workspace. If you would like to see a separate video on the different selection tools, let us know in the comments. Now that we're in the Select and Mask workspace, you'll notice that the image has this colored overlay. This is because we do not yet have an active selection. I'm going to click the Select Subject button. For more detailed initial selection results, make sure Photoshop is using the cloud to execute the process. Now, as you can see, we have a pretty decent selection of our subject. On the right-hand menu of the workspace, you'll see many different view and refinement options. At the top of this workspace are different view options. You can pick between an onion skin, marching ants selection lines, a color overlay, subject on black, subject on white, black and white, or on layers. Which view option you choose to use is totally subjective and does not directly affect the final selection. Because our subject is on a lighter background, I will use the on black view option so I can make sure I've removed the background entirely. Below the view options, you will see different global refinement tools. First, choose the refine mode you wish to use, either color aware or object aware. Which refinement mode you use will depend on the background of the subject you are trying to isolate. Try out both and see which is best suited for your particular image. Below the refine mode, you will see the edge detection module. Use the radius slider to adjust how much area around your subject will be affected by the refinements. For a tight, sharp mask, use a small radius. For a softer mask, use a larger radius. Smart Radius may be helpful to toggle on as it allows the radius to change depending on the area of the selection. Below Edge Detection, you'll see the Global Refinement module. Here you have Smooth, Feather, Contrast, and Shift Edge sliders. The Smooth slider adjusts the smoothness or roughness of your selection. The Feather slider controls the softness of the edge of the selection. Increasing the feather value creates a smoother transition between the selected and unselected areas. The Contrast slider adjusts the sharpness of the selection edge. Increasing the contrast value enhances the distinction between the selected and unselected areas, making the edge more defined. And last but not least, the Shift Edge slider moves the edge of your selection inward or outward from your selection. Under Global Refinement, you will see the Output Settings module. Decontaminate Colors helps remove color from the subject's original background that's still remaining after your selection refinement. I will check this off, but see if your selection requires it as well. Finally, you'll see Output To options. Again, pick whichever works for you, but I'm going to go with the Layer Mask option to ensure I'm editing non-destructively. To see our video on smart objects and layer masks, check out this video right here. On the left-hand side, you will see your selection tools and refinement brushes. Some of these may be familiar to you, such as the lasso, quick selection, object selection, and brush tools. In this video, however, we will be specifically focusing on the Refine Edge brush tool. By dragging the Refine Edge brush over any areas you wish to be transparent, you are letting Photoshop know that it needs to reconsider its selection. As you can see, if I drag the Refine Edge brush over my subject's hair, the selection becomes much more accurate. Be sure to only use this tool over the areas that require it, as over-refining the subject's edge may result in an overly soft mask. Now that I'm happy with my selection, I'm going to hit OK on the bottom right-hand corner. Compared side by side to the basic Photoshop selection, you can see that the Select and Mask tool has allowed me to make a much more refined, realistic selection. Next, we've got Adam explaining how smart objects and layer masks work in Photoshop. These are essential tools when you're editing.
Hi, I'm Adam from Messenger Bag Media, and today I'm going to demonstrate the basics of non-destructive editing in Adobe Photoshop. Specifically, I'm going to introduce you to smart objects and layer masks, their functions, and why you should be using them. Let's jump into it. One benefit of using smart objects is non-destructive scaling. I'm going to first place an image in this Photoshop file. As of now, this is just a regular image. If I wish to scale this image smaller, I cannot scale the image back up to its original size without noticing a significant loss in resolution. Because my image is not a smart object, Photoshop resamples it when I transform its scale, degrading the quality of the image if you scale it smaller than its original size. This workflow would be considered destructive editing. Let's start over. Placing my image into Photoshop, if I right-click on my image layer and hit Convert to Smart Object, you'll see a small icon appear in the corner of my image. This icon signals that the layer is now a smart object. Think of a smart object as a container holding any object put inside of it, in this case an image. Now that my image is converted to a smart object, I can scale it large and small repeatedly without suffering any loss of quality. This workflow would be non-destructive because it does not erase any of the information from the original file as I make adjustments. Another benefit of using smart objects is that you can apply non-destructive effects. Returning to my Photoshop artboard, I will apply a blur to a regular image layer. Once applied, these effects are considered baked in and cannot be adjusted. This can cause serious workflow issues down the road if I decide that I wish to change or adjust one of these effects. I'll need to undo the operation and reapply the effect from scratch. However, if I convert this layer into a smart object before applying my desired effects, you'll notice a smart filter menu under my image layer, listing the active effects. If I wish to adjust one of these effects later, all I need to do is double-click on the effect under my layer and make any adjustments. Remember how I said smart objects are like containers? Well, this is actually a very useful function. Let's take a look at a very simple screen replacement example. There are many ways to do this, but this is a quick method that allows for easy adjustments to the image on the screen. I'll begin by drawing a shape with the same aspect ratio as the computer screen and convert it into a smart object. I can do a non-destructive perspective transform by using the shortcut Command or Control T and holding Command or Control as I drag the anchor points of the shape to fit the corners of the screen. You'll see now that if I double click on the smart object, it will open a new Photoshop tab. This is because the smart object is a container holding information, not an actual image itself. So if I place an image and some text in this tab and save it, you'll see that it appears on the smart object I'd already placed over the computer screen. Pretty neat, huh? It matches the perspective that I warped the shape to, and if I decide I need to change the contents of the screen later, I can always open the smart object and reach the original material undamaged. Smart objects are one tool to ensure you are editing non-destructively on your images. Next, let's take a look at layer masks. Here I have two overlapping images, as you can see in my image module, but we can only see one. This is because the top image is eclipsing the bottom image. If I want to add some transparency to the first image to reveal the one below it, I have a few options. My first option is to delete or erase the pixels on the first image, either using a selection tool or by using the eraser tool itself. This works fairly well, but as with effects on non-smart objects, it does not afford me the ability to adjust or remove the transparency later without undoing the operation. A much better option is to use layer masks. To do this, I will select the layer mask icon at the bottom of the layers module. You'll see a white layer appear beside my active layer. This is a mask that corresponds opacity to transparency. Let me explain. Right now, the opacity of the layer mask is set to 0. It's entirely white, meaning that the transparency of my layer is set to 0%. If I grab the brush tool and set it to 100% black, you'll see that as I brush my mask, it creates transparency on my layer. However, no pixels are actually being deleted, meaning that I can change my brush to white and all that image information is still available. Again, non-destructive editing. When working with a brush, you have 4 main controls: the size, hardness, opacity, and flow. Size is, well, the size of your brush in pixels. Hardness controls the amount of feathering around the brush, the hardness or the contrast of the brush edge. Opacity is the maximum opacity of color that your brush is able to produce. Flow, on the other hand, is how quickly it will reach that maximum opacity. A 25% flow, for example, will take 4 strokes to reach the full opacity, whereas 100% flow will only take 1. Keep in mind, however, that if your opacity is only set to 50%, the 25% flow will be 25% of that 50% total opacity. I think that makes sense. If you'd like to see a separate video more in depth on the brush tool, let us know in the comments. But those are some simple functions that will get you going when making masks. Masks also work great with the selection tool. When using selection tools, the select and mask function affords greater control over your selection. If I use the object selection tool to select my subject, I can use select and mask to make finer adjustments. I can then save this as a new layer mask rather than actually deleting the surrounding pixels. Stay tuned for a separate video on the different selection methods and background removal using the select and mask tool. We barely scratched the surface on non-destructive editing, and there's always 1,000 ways to do the same thing in Photoshop.
For our third lesson, we're looking at the importance and difference between RGB and CMYK colors. Take it away, Adam.
We've all been there. You're online shopping and purchase a sharp navy blue suit. However, when it arrives, it's not navy blue, it's royal blue. Disappointed, you return the suit and will likely never shop at this store again. The store just lost a customer, and probably for life. As a media professional, you don't want this happening with any of your clients. Even if you don't work in media, it's still important to understand the significant impact that color accuracy has on your brand. It's important that you understand the common color formats available and when you should be using each one. This is especially true if you find yourself working in print, digital, and web media. I should preface that this video is not going to talk about color theory. Rather, it will serve as an introduction to color formats for different applications. So let's get into it. Let's begin by looking at 2 popular color modes. What is a color mode anyway? You may have heard the term color mode or color model and color space. A color mode or model refers to the model used by your computer to represent colors digitally. The most popular color modes we'll be looking at today is RGB, or red, green, and blue, and CMYK, or cyan, magenta, yellow, and key, with the key meaning black. There are also such things as color spaces, which are different from color modes. A color space refers to the color range or gamut of colors that can be accurately represented. For example, you could be working in the RGB color mode, but what RGB color space? sRGB, Adobe RGB 1998, ProPhoto RGB. Each color space is capable of displaying a different gamut of colors. Color spaces, however, are a topic for another video. Let's take a closer look at color modes. First, let's talk about RGB. RGB is an additive color mode. This means that if you layer every color on top of each other, they increase in value to eventually create a solid white. This is because RGB is working with light, where black would be the absence of color or a shut-off pixel. That is, the RGB color mode is used when working with colors to be viewed on electronic displays such as computer screens, televisions, digital projectors, and smartphones. Like the pixels on these displays, RGB works by mixing different intensities of red, green, and blue to create a wide range of colors. Each color channel ranges from intensities of 0 to 255, and these unique combinations create different perceived colors capable of producing complex gradients and images. As mentioned, the RGB color mode should be used exclusively for screen applications. Sending an RGB document to print will result in inaccurate colors when compared to what's seen on your working file, potentially resulting in an unhappy client. CMYK, on the other hand, is a subtractive color mode, meaning that if you layer every available color, they will decrease in value, creating a solid black. The CMYK mode represents working with ink. That is, subtracting various amounts of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink from white paper to create different colors. As with RGB, CMYK is capable of producing complex gradients, and with the addition of the key color, or black, can reproduce images with shadow and texture on print. A CMYK image viewed on screens, however, will result in a washed out looking image. That's why it's always important to ensure that you're using the right color mode for your desired application. You may have heard of some other types of color formats as well, such as Pantone colors, for example. Unlike RGB and CMYK, which can create a wide variety of colors and complex gradients, Pantone is a popular proprietary color matching system, which refers to a method or technology used to ensure consistency and accuracy in reproducing very specific individual colors. Pantone colors are owned by the Pantone company itself, meaning they're not publicly available. Pantone colors are identified by unique codes and names, and each color is mixed by print shops using specific ink formulas to achieve consistent results. Pantone colors are commonly used for branding, logo designs, and any project where precise color matching is crucial. Coca-Cola, for example, has its own specific red, PMS 484. This color, as with all Pantone colors, can be closely approximated in print with CMYK, but will not be exactly the same. When printing, you have two options: process color and spot color. Process color refers to printing in CMYK, which mixes cyan, magenta, yellow, and key to create close approximations of colors. This is ideal for printing images and gradients. You pay for 4 colors and can approximate almost any color of the rainbow. Spot color, on the other hand, uses individual colors. It is unable to print gradients or images, and you must pay for each color you include. So why do this? Because spot color uses Pantone or other proprietary color matching systems to create the exact brand colors that look beautiful. Looking closely at a CMYK print, you can see the individual colors used to approximate a different color. Look closely at a spot color print and you'll see a solid color, like paint. Which type of printing you should use entirely depends on your print job and what you plan to do. You may have also heard of hex or hexadecimal colors. Hex codes are commonly used in web design. Colors in the hex system are represented using a combination of 6-digit letters and numbers. Hex is not a color mode, rather it's a system of universally communicating colors to different applications. These 6-digit codes work to specify RGB values to HTML, CSS, and other tools for designing websites, apps, and digital content. In summary, RGB is used for electronic displays, CMYK is used for printing, Pantone is used for precise color matching and printing, and hex is used for specifying colors on web and digital graphics. Understanding the difference between these color modes and systems is essential for producing accurate and consistent colors across different mediums and applications. To wrap up this video, let's take a look at a quick demonstration of creating consistent brand colors across different media. Let's imagine you're developing visual branding for a new company. You decide to use the Pantone color PMS 2597C as their main brand color. If you were to have their company color printed in spot color, you would use this code to specify to the printer what exact ink formula they would use to print this one color. However, if you want to use their logo on a printed flyer that also contains images, you would likely need to print using process color. This means you would need a CMYK value to approximate your Pantone color. Further, if you were to use their logo on social media, for example, you would need an RGB value to approximate the Pantone color. Finally, if you wanted to use this color on their website, you would need a hex code communicating the RGB values to your web builder. If you did your job right, the difference between the Pantone, CMYK, RGB, and web colors would be relatively minor. Of course, it's impossible to exactly replicate color using different methods, and some color will be harder to approximate than others. But the final result should be consistent branding across different media.
When it comes to making layouts for PDFs, brochures, magazines, and more, InDesign is the standard. These keyboard shortcuts for dealing with grids and guides are extremely helpful.
I'm excited to share with you 7 keyboard shortcuts when working with guides and grids in Adobe InDesign. Let's jump into it. The first 4 shortcuts I will demonstrate allow you to show or hide your guides, grids, or baselines. While guides, grids, and baselines are all super useful alignment tools, it can sometimes be helpful to turn them off, take a step back, and view your product the way that it will be viewed by your end user. Remember, we don't design for grids and columns, we design for humans. So it's always important to look at your product from a human perspective and make any subtle adjustments needed to ensure your design feels natural. First, how do you turn on and off your guides? Guides refer to column structures and ruler guides that you've created in your document. As you can see in this simple 3-shape design, everything is aligned perfectly to my guides and is technically even. To hide guides on a Windows computer, you'll use the shortcut Control semicolon. On a Mac, that would be Command semicolon. I'm on a Mac, so I'll use the shortcut Command semicolon. Now, having removed my guides, I can see that although the shapes are technically the same size, the circle looks a little bit smaller when compared to the rest of the shapes. To compensate for this, I'll enable my guides, make the circle a little bit larger, and remove the guides again to see how it looks. Perfect. While not technically all the same size, the shapes look much more even and natural. This is why it's always important to turn off your guides every once in a while and look at your design subjectively and make any adjustments needed. Next, let's look into showing or hiding the document grid, which is that gray background grid that looks almost like one of those pieces of grid paper you would have used in math class. To toggle on or off the document grid on a Windows computer, you're going to want to use the shortcut Control''. If you're on a Mac, that will be Command''. Returning to my document, if I'd like to enable my document grid, I can use the shortcut Command''. And as you can see in this specific layout, it's a little bit distracting and unnecessary. It takes away from my ruler guides that I've created. So to remove it, I would repeat that shortcut Command'', and the document grid disappears. Now what if you would like to turn on or off your baseline grid? Baseline grids can be super useful when working with type layouts. To show or hide your baseline grid on a Windows computer, use the shortcut Control''. If you're on a Mac, that would be Command''. To check that my images and text are all lined up on the baseline grid in this mock article, I would use the shortcut Command'' to turn on the baseline grid. Yep, looking good. Finally, what if you would like to enable or disable your smart guides? Smart guides are those pink or green guides that appear as you move an object around on your page, indicating whether or not you are lined up with another object or centered horizontally or vertically on the page. To enable or disable smart guides on a Windows computer, use the shortcut Control''. If you're on a Mac, that would be Command''. As you can see, if I move this object around in my document, I'm not getting any alignment indication. This means that my smart guides are disabled. If I use the shortcut Command'', you can now see that my smart guides are active. It's important to note that you cannot turn on smart guides if you have Snap to Document Grid enabled. So what is Snap to Document Grid? Snap to Document Grid means that objects will automatically align with the gray document grid previously mentioned. To enable Snap to Document Grid on a Windows computer, use the shortcut Control''. If you're on a Mac, that would be Command''. As you can see, if I move an object near a grid line, it will automatically snap in alignment. If I repeat this shortcut, Command'', the object no longer snaps to the grid and moves past it freely. What if instead you prefer your objects snap to other guides, such as your columns or custom ruler guides? On a Windows computer, you would use the shortcut Control''. If you're on a Mac, that would be Command''. As you can see, if I drag an object close to a ruler guide, it automatically aligns with it. If I repeat this shortcut, Command'', it no longer snaps to the guide and moves past it. The final shortcut that I will share with you today will teach you how to lock or unlock your ruler guides. If you spent the time to create custom ruler guides on your page, you don't want to be accidentally moving them as you adjust objects in your layout. To lock your ruler guides on a Windows computer, use the shortcut Control''. If you're on a Mac, that would be Command''. As you can see, the ruler guide no longer responds to my cursor. If I change my mind and want to adjust my guides, I can repeat the shortcut Command'', and adjust it freely.
What's the difference between vector and raster file formats? You may accidentally be destroying your image quality without realizing it. Here's the difference between some of the common file formats.
Are you a graphic designer, photographer, web designer, or videographer? If you find yourself working with a lot of graphics and images, then you'll greatly benefit from understanding the different common file formats available to you and their unique advantages and drawbacks. I'm Adam from Messenger Bag Media, and today I'm going to go through some of the most common file formats someone working with or creating graphics and images will encounter. Keep in mind that there are many different types of file formats, and these are just a few of the common ones that you'll become familiar with when working in any visual media field. It might be helpful to differentiate the two main types of image or graphic file formats, vector and raster. Let's begin by talking about some different types of raster formats and what they do. Rasterized graphics or images may be the file formats with which you're already the most familiar. A raster is constructed by a grid of pixels. Raster graphics have a resolution, referring to the dimensions of the image or graphic. These images can be large, high-quality files or smaller, low-quality ones. However, even at extremely large resolution, raster files will always be limited to the number of pixels it's made up of. Whether your image is saved with a pixel density of 72 ppi or pixels per inch for digital or web, or 300 ppi for print, will determine how large your file can be scaled before losing quality or sharpness. One common raster file you may be aware of is the JPEG. The JPEG file format is one of the most common image formats, particularly used for photographs and images with complex color gradients. JPEG files use lossy compression, meaning the original file data is removed and any adjustments or corrections made to the image are baked in. This can lead to a subtle loss in quality. While this compression may be helpful if you're creating images for the web where load times are priority over compression could lead to quality issues. This is especially true if you're reprocessing a JPEG multiple times and can lead to that deep fried look so commonly associated with memes. JPEG images are best used on the web and other digital uses, but are not typically recommended for print materials. Another file you've probably seen before is the PNG file. Unlike JPEGs, PNGs support transparency. Also unlike JPEGs, PNGs use lossless compression. This means no matter how often you save or edit these files, they will retain their original quality. PNG files are often used for video assets and web-based designs where transparency is required. Next, let's talk about some other commonly used raster files. PSD files are native to Adobe Photoshop. This is a non-destructive file format that supports layers, meaning edits to an image are reversible and does not damage the original image if used properly. These files are useful because they allow for editing the images using Photoshop tools. However, they're limited in their exclusive compatibility to Adobe Photoshop software. TIFF files, on the other hand, are similar to PSD files, but are more universal. These files also support layers and transparency, but are not native to any specific platform. TIFF files are lossless file formats and are great for printing, but less ideal for web-based applications where quality and the size of the file might result in long load times, if they're even compatible. Lastly, let's take a look at RAW file formats. You might know these as CR2, NEF, or ARW files. Think of these as equivalent to digital negatives. Unlike JPEG, PNG, and TIFF files, RAW images retain all the information captured by the camera's sensor with minimal compression. This gives photo editors the flexibility to adjust the white balance, hue, saturation, and, to an extent, exposure without degrading the image quality. RAW files are extremely large and are not usable by the vast majority of applications. These files are best used for the non-destructive editing of images that will later be saved as JPEG, PNG, or TIFF files for their appropriate usages. Next, let's talk a bit about vector formats. Vector graphics do not use pixels and therefore don't suffer from the same pixel density issues associated with raster files. An image taken from a camera will never be a vector image. It's inherently rasterized as a digital camera's sensor uses pixels to capture information. However, logos, text, and other digital graphics can be saved in a vector format. This format is essentially a mathematical equation about the object's shape and properties.
It's a mathematical term, a quantity represented by an arrow with both direction and magnitude.
Therefore, no matter how large you scale a vector graphic, it will never degrade in quality.
Oh yeah!
One of the most popular vector formats is AI, which is native to Adobe Illustrator. Adobe Photoshop is raster-based, although it does support vector objects. But Adobe InDesign and Illustrator are vector-based. This means that the applications preserve vector data and allow for the easy editing of individual elements in a non-destructive manner. AI files are vector-based and support artboards and layers. With that said, like PSD files, one of the drawbacks is that AI files are exclusively compatible with Adobe Illustrator. An EPS file is similar to an AI file in that it's vector-based and supports artboards and layers. However, think of EPS to AI as TIFF is to PSD. EPS is a more versatile file format and is not limited to Illustrator, and is commonly used in print applications. With that said, although EPS is not native to a specific software, it still requires specialized software to use all of its available functions. This is why PDF files are so popular. PDF files are primarily used for documents and support vector graphics, raster images, and embedded text. PDF files are great for sharing designs while preserving quality and formatting, but do not offer the same level of functionality as an EPS or AI file. However, they are compatible with a wide variety of applications and therefore are accessible by clients for reviewing designs or other projects.
Lastly, as a bonus mention, if you liked these tips and lessons, check out our other videos on Mac keyboard shortcuts to improve your productivity, or check out one of our photo and video gear reviews. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like. Is there a topic or a lesson you'd like to see us cover in a future video? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.